Hi everyone, good evening. Thanks for tuning in. So once again, it's me, Jazion, just here on a very nice Sunday evening here in Singapore, painting up stuff for our games. So today's stream is actually gonna be a bit more relaxing than usual, and it's gonna show more of my work process. I normally genital prime my miniatures so that it's easier to see them on stream. So there are a lot more options. But today we are painting stuff that's a lot darker in color. So you're not gonna see the as obvious incidental effects as other things. And I have a couple pieces that are fresh off the printer, just cured, and they were printed in a black resin, so they're pretty dark. But I thought it'd be a good chance to talk about the process of painting up from black. It's just that it takes a little more time to see results with this than you usually would otherwise. The nice thing about Example Prime is that, with just some very basic layering and translucent colors, you approach a nice result super fast. But this, we are painting completely up from black or a darker color, so it's gonna be a little different. So the kangaroo that I have today, they are from White Werewolf Tavern. The other miniature here is from TPK Lab, and I believe it's called the Dark Fox Militia. It's kind of like a ninja-like miniature, and this is the base for it. I really like this base, it's super nice. So that's supposed to be hanging on the side of the base, and just glue it on nicely there. But hey, you see, even without glue, it kind of sticks. And hey, Lidro! Good evening. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you're having a nice Sunday and are avoiding the crowd, because when I was on the way in and grabbing dinner earlier, holy crap, the weekend crowds are back in full force. It is pretty scary. And it was also the reason I had to delay the stream, because I actually got food on the way in. But when I went to pick up my food, they said that they had completely missed the order and they had actually closed their orders. So I had to wait for more food. I was not very happy. Let's swap to more chill music. Yeah, I was very sad. That was my first meal of the day. So just like absolutely no food. Very sad face indeed. And for some reason this keeps happening to me. I'm just unlucky, I guess. Or I like to order food before restaurants close their orders. But if you like video games, I also recently printed something. Not for the store. This is not for the store, but this is just for fun. So it might look a little familiar if you played some of the recent, the popular JRPGs. It's a little hole in the back as well. Cute. I guess it's the safe resin. And yeah, the crowds are just kind of crazy. I guess that a lot of the larger families are just out in full force. It's a large jar creature. Yep. But I could totally work as a mimic. I guess a very angry mimic, one that will run straight at you. It is, but the mimic pot is not as good as the mimic chamber pot, which is wonderful. So this is actually a piece I was planning on painting today, but my life hates me. I mean, well, what happened is that there was an error in the print, and I just was not happy with how it turned out, so I will be reprinting that. And instead, I'm going to be posting on Instagram when I paint that up. Hopefully by maybe the next 3 days or so. Maybe chamber pot is fine, but you know who would fall for it? A lot of people. A lot will fall for it. And this is also something that I was thinking about painting up today. The lovely, lovely scout. It's a Sherlock Holmes, but steampunk. And because he's steampunk, he actually had mechanical arms on his back. But I want to paint him without those arms, so what I actually need to do is kind of sculpt in the fabric detail, I guess. And I'm not in the mood for that, so less sculpting today. Oh, you know, if I just kind of just paint him up, you think anyone's gonna notice that he has a hole in the back? Right? It's perfectly normal. It's such a nice sculpt. This is from clay cyanide. And I'll be adding more of their stuff to the store soon because I have just finished test printing and checking out some of their latest releases and going back through some of the older releases to make sure that I have no issues with those. So lots of really cool stuff. And also some other stuff I'm adding to the store soon because I just done test printing the initial ones. It's new, chunky. So this style is definitely not as pretty and delicate as clay cyanide, but I think it has its own appeal. And the nice thing about it is that because it's a little on the thick side, it's a lot harder to damage it. Because we all have that friend who has the clumsiness of an overgrown 5-year-old golden retriever. Right. We all have that friend who will break your stuff. Why even friends? So if you like playing stuff on the tabletop, it's good to have stuff that is a little less likely to break. Like, I have some minis that I would love to paint. And I have painted them, but I'm not going to use them on the table because it's just asking for terrible things to happen. Anyway, be right back. I thought I took it, but I did not grab my wet palette. Or me being silly and forgetting my wet palette after filling it up with water. Perfectly normal things to do, guys. Now back to the painting thing. I definitely want to work on the Dark Fox / Black Viper. I'm just thinking about how I want to paint her. And considering scaling up the miniature a little bit, because she looks so tiny. Like, I mean, sure, she is crouched, but like, compared to the kangaroo, that's a little small. It's like the difference between true 28mm and 32mm. Like, see. Sure, slightly out of scale, but this is taller than the kangaroo with her, especially because she is crouched. It looks a little small. I feel like if I scale her up by maybe 5% or even 10%, it's gonna look a lot better. And because the way the miniature is designed means that there are no actual keys for her to attach herself to, should I still hold on to the base just fine. So I think I wanna go back and scale her up. But I can't really like how this miniature looks so far. It's not super obvious, but she is wearing a nice mask. Can you see it? So yeah, maybe I'll just give this copy of her stuff away or something, and then print a scaled up version. And I think that's gonna be a lot better for showing the details as well. It's quite nicely detailed. And the base can just stay as is. It's a very nice base. Okay, note to self, reprint Ninja. And do not lose Ninja, because a black miniature on a black tablecloth is a recipe for disaster. Ask me how I know. In any case, I can still work on painting up the base, so that's okay. That's not a bad thing. So you can kind of tell that my paintbrushes are so badly taken care of, or just very old. And I think it's about time that I mostly retire the set, except for painting terrain. Need to get another set of paintbrushes. Though of course some of the older paintbrushes are still working. And I can't say that, you know, they've not lasted me a super long time, because I've been painting what, 4 or 5 years, and I've been using them for majority of the time. Whether it's painting terrain or anything else, they have been great. So back to the kangaroo. The cruel people in robes. Very detailed shield, nice. So they are dressed in a pretty ragged fashion. I didn't quite like the supports they did for this miniature, but I was too lazy to redo them, so we'll live with that. And I guess they're all from the same sculptor, right? So I can just paint them in similar colors. And obviously, if I ask Crimson what color I should paint them, he's like, paint them black. Wow, paint the Raven black, who would have thought? But I also want the clothes that they're wearing to stand out a little bit more compared to just being black. So I need to think about what exactly they're wearing. And think about wearing very black clothes is that the longer you wear them, the more you wash it, the more the color is going to bleach out. So I think that we're going to go for some very desaturated colors on there for sure. Though of course I also kind of just want to not spend too much time fussing around the detail on them because they're just NPCs. And they're not like proper NPCs, they're just like random moves that you fight. You could say off black, but you know what shade of like off black? What is the other color that you add to the black to make it off? Don't think about that. Let me ask you about paint colors with you. The most annoying answers. So I think I'm gonna go with a bit of a dark red tone to some of their clothes. And because they are kind of hanging out in an urban setting, so the urban setting in medieval times has a lot of wood, a lot of brown. So I think I try to use a bit more of these saturated browns and grays on them. And I'm kind of tempted to paint their beaks a bright yellow instead of the usual crow beaks because I like miners and they're very cute. I mean, it's not that all gonna be like one of the Assassin's Creed cosplayers and wearing white boots, right? It's actually an interesting thought. The hex code is pointless, so you can send me a screenshot of the actual color. Or you could just say things like, no, desaturated brown. Like, telling me black when it's clearly a dark blue doesn't help.
Desaturated brown. It's
Oh,
desaturated brown.
The uwu birds are. I'm curious. Actually, it works out pretty well because they have this pale yellow beak that's almost off-white, and they have very, very bright red eyes. The bright red eyes are because they wake up everyone in the morning and don't let us sleep in. I mentioned I don't do that. Yes, I should probably drink more water. That is a good reminder. So, I'm gonna be using more of my P3 stuff today. Actually, want my both friends to have really brightly colored eyes. I'm taking a quick look at the Asian claw. It has a bit of a blue shine to its feathers. And it's pretty nice. I wonder if you can work with it. That's a great suggestion, then use it. Inspiration. So I've got a little bit of quick spade, which is a really nice desaturated green. Which is great for if you want to paint disease skin. That's a highlight for black sometimes. So you can see it's a little bit greenish. I might know what that's like. So I'm kind of just barely thinning the paint. I have a damp brush, but that's all. It's a good time to wet blend if I was going to. But because I'm batch painting, sometimes wet blending isn't always the best choice. Painting a lot of things. Just put that color on. And I'm gonna let it dry. And I think I also want to use my sanguine base, so I'm going to use that on the other hooded. Okay. And that way we're going to have both of them with a really dark desaturated tone for their hood, so it's a dark color. But it's also clearly going to be different colors, so it's easier to tell them apart. Because I'm not in the habit of labeling my enemies in the end, like Goblin 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I find it a little easier to just keep track of them by painting them slightly differently. That's why having miniatures is useful for that. I think this color will be great. It's good. And I'm just painting most of the color for the upper hood and upper body in first. And I'm only using base color. Why am I only using base color? Well, that's because I need to paint in the faces of the jungle. And I fully expect that when I'm working on the faces, trying to do the koala thing, I'm going to end up painting over the other parts. So just having this base color painted in means that I can just paint over the mistakes very quickly later on. So for these three stooges, one's a reddish color, one's a green color, which means the last one should be blue. Need the full RGB set. So I think it's really cute, but they have teeny, tiny drawstrings. Yeah, boots. It's like, were drawstrings even invented back then? Don't know. We'll see. So Waterdeep stays in Waterdeep. So I'm actually playing this up for a game that some of our customers booked for us, a private game, where they'll be playing Dragon Heist, which is one of the most popular D&D hardcover adventures that's been released so far. And it's kind of our own remix of it. Like Crimson's version of it, it's a little special, it's a little different from the usual takes on it. It's gonna be really interesting. Also, how I'm filling my strength checks in this bottle of water. I made it. Water. You also notice that when I paint, I tend to drink either canned drinks or bottled drinks, so that I do not drink my paint cup. This comes from experience. So we're gonna have the last, I guess, more custom-made looking dude wearing dark blue. I don't care about that right now, because technically he's not hooded, it's gonna be easier to paint the rest of him. And I am going to undercoat the features to have that really nice color shifting blue feathers. And the paint water is delicious. I mean, it should not be drunk. But for those of you that have cats, there's a good chance they will try. So be careful if you have pets to not let them chug your paint water. I don't normally use. It's pretty nice. It's called nauseous blue. I suppose that it makes people feel unwell. And what's not obvious, and to move this over to and see. It's a little different from the rest of the P3 paints. You will notice that it's a little bit more translucent. So I really don't have to thin it down that much. So I just put it on pretty thick. first, wipe, paint off brush. So this is the first time I'm using this color. Or then like maybe the one time that I tried it out when I first opened the bottle. So it will be interesting seeing how it turns out. Thick application. Later on, I really need to have some bright red eyes. Super bright red. Then pop out. And be scary here. The good news is that painting feathers is really a lot like painting fur. It's not that far off. Because they're both a little bit on the translucent side. And they normally have some nice sculpted texture. This bird has very muscular arms. And I'll add that blue to the arms as well. Nauseous blue. Interesting color. You can also kind of tell that my brush is really starting to die again. It's not sharp. But you can also tell that I really don't care, because you don't need a super fine point for a lot of what we're doing right now. It's also why some people love synthetic brushes, because they're so cheap, right, that you don't care even if they start dying. But they start dying very fast. And that's something that's not a good thing. Because, sure, well, these saber brushes, the tips are starting to blunt and they have become chunky. And on the chunky side, they still don't curl in the way a synthetic does. They just don't hold a sharp point anymore. But they still have all the other properties that you look for in a brush. Because if a brush is on the stiffer side, it's a lot easier for you to find control with it. It's not like super bendy and annoying to work with. Like that's called a snap of the brush. If you're doing very small, very precise details, you tend to want a brush that is a little stiffer. And that's why people like saber brushes, because they're a bit stiffer. Move the camera on my paw. What do you mean? Was I painting off camera again? Or was it just a lighting issue? Like, was it me painting off camera or just not being obvious? Because right now the stuff I'm painting is kind of just black and black. It's not a bit interesting, and half the details aren't even really there. Ah, I see. Just tell me when I'm off camera then. It's good to know. It's like, it's the downside of where the camera is set right now. It's always a bit too far away from me to really see what I'm painting. And I had a light arch, which was perfect for that, but it got broken. And I've not had a time chance to fix it yet. Wonder who broke it. I mean, Khonshu is a bird, so I would suppose so. But I guess that you could technically play a Enku who looks like Khonshu. Alright, time for the base coats. Nice and easy base coating. Let's see. Minus. Have those whitish. But I see you've been watching Moon Knight. I heard that the episodes are pretty decent. And maybe if these kind of crew have another friend of theirs that joins them, I will paint him as wearing like pure white armor or fabric. Don't want to focus too much on painting the beaks. So I'm just kind of gonna do something that I very rarely do and do a paintbrush. Do some loaded brush. The nauseous blue. Not nauseating blue, nauseous blue. Sailor Moon team. No, I don't think so. But definitely Moon Knight inspired is not a bad thing. So, I dropped my paintbrush. So if I wanna paint it with an off-white beak, I'll be using some of the blue as undertone. A bit of that in there. Makes a little bit of grey. And a little bit of white at the end. And just do a bit of bright ivory there. On the other side, bright ivory. Grayish white. Line, the white line in the center, because that's where you want the brightest reflection. I'm sure there's probably already decent Sailor Moon Knight fan art going around. I know that now that I've said it, you're gonna find it and share it. these dots, you can see where they are. It's time to go back and clean off a little bit of white around the eye. Okay, that is mostly fixed. So in the recent paint hangout, some people were asking about how to paint eyes. And the answer is usually, with great difficulty. Especially if you're new, and especially if you're using a paintbrush that isn't very precise. And half the time, just having the eye whites in there is good enough. One of our friends tends to paint all his miniatures with like glowing eyes instead because he doesn't like painting in the pupils of the eyes. That's also why said friend always gets scolded by me for not painting. That's besides the point. It's kind of approaching the point. And the reason for that is that painting eyes, just like everything else that's put in position in painting, requires a set of skills that new painters may not necessarily be aware of. So like being aware of how much paint is on your brush, whether or not you can draw a straight line with paint, how thick the paint is, and how it flows off the brush. These are not things that come naturally unless you have someone that's giving you tips and guidance on how to do it well. So if you're a new painter and you're struggling with painting eyes, that's actually okay. It will get easier, but the most important thing to painting eyes is that you need to make sure that when you're painting eyes that your basics are there. You need to know how much paint you have on your brush. You need to know how watery that paint is, because if the paint is too watery, if you have a lot of water on your brush, for example, like this, your brush is not going to hold a really nice point. So you need to clean off your brush, whether it's in a wet towel or something. And also, I always say that if you have too much paint on your brush, for example like this, you're not going to be able to paint a nice thin line. Why is that? Well, when you have a big blob of paint, it's not me painting white like that, right? So if you want to have more control, you need to wipe off your paint. It's easy to get nice thin line. See, and that's just the difference between wiping off your paint. I didn't thin down the paint or change how it works, it's just like this. And you also want to make sure that your brush is damp. I always remind people that they need to be washing off their brush often when they're painting. And once you're done washing off your brush, you need to be wiping off the extra water on your brush so your brush can keep its shape better. Paint. So painting eyes is difficult because it's the biggest test of brush control as a new painter. And because all of us have seen eyes so often in daily life, I hope that you see people with eyes and not without eyes. It's very easy to tell when the eyes look a little bit off, right? So if you aren't very good with brush control and your eye whites go everywhere, you're gonna have eyes that like bleeding down onto your cheeks, and that's not something that you really want. So don't worry too much about painting eyes at the start. You will get better at it, And a big part of painting as well is knowing how to go back and clean up your mistakes, or working in a way that makes it easy to clean the mistakes up. So if you find that you're having issues with painting, and because you find that, when you're painting, you leave a lot of you leave a lot of mistakes all over your miniature, like when you overpaint, then that's fine. It's actually something that I do very often as well, especially when I'm just painting like this, right? So I'm not painting in a very smooth way. I'm really just buffing it in. And I'm using the light on my right as a guide for how it looks. So, does it look good right now? It really doesn't. But that's okay. I can clean it up later. Or rather, as I go on, most of these mistakes are going to be covered up. And one of the questions that I get asked as a painter by people that see my stuff and say, these miniatures are so small, how do you paint them? Like, do you have amazingly non-shaky hands? Not really. If you had me hold my hand like this, just like this, you see my hand is shaking a little bit. It's not full on, vibrating, but my hand is not very smooth, it's not very even. And the truth is that you don't need to have perfectly even hands to paint miniatures. Does it make it easier? Oh yeah, for sure. A lot easier, in fact. But steady hands also comes with practice and technique. And if you're new and you don't have steady hands, then that's just the way it is. It's not something to be ashamed of or to be too bothered by. And remember, if both your hands are shaky, then just put them together, like this, right? Brace your hand against your other hand, like I'm doing, because if your hands both shake, it doesn't matter as long as they shake in sync. Because if they're together, one hand's gonna push the other hand, and it still won't affect your overall brush control. So while painting does seem as simple as just putting some color on there, you do need to think about the method that you use to paint and whether or not it makes it easier for you to paint. It's not about buying special products that make you amazing at painting, though that's always fun. But it's about learning the properties of your paint, recognizing your own style in painting, and working with your own mistakes. So you should not get too frustrated at yourself if you're making mistakes. Must be painted over. So right now, he looks very white. you've lost a lot of the original kind of darker color, which is okay. I'm just gonna bring back down later. Actually, no, let me just put them through. So because I have that very transparent dark blue earlier, if I just apply that over the more of that blue. Can I just export this instead? But later on, I'm going to take a nice transparent black and go over all of this. And darken down the ivory and gray violet. Honestly speaking, if you look at it right now, like at these from a table distance, like further away, I think it stands out pretty well. You can see the face, you can see the highlights, and shadowing on the miniature. And that's something else that I think many people have trouble with. Because I knew I had a lot of trouble with that. You know, when I first started and I put down highlights, I'll go, oh no, it's too high in contrast. And I'll spend forever trying to blend some nice highlights in, only to find myself very disappointed because when I looked at my mission from further away, it was just a mess of like color. There was no contrast with it. I couldn't see where the light and shadows fell in the miniature. It was just, these are nice gradient blends, and that's all. Which is why I always tell people that it's more important for you to get your contrast and your miniature right, and then do your blending after, than it is for you to start blending and find that your colors aren't even right. So knowing how to paint in a way that lets you forget about blending first and more on the colors that you're putting down and their brightness or darkness makes it easier for you to learn more advanced techniques later on. So for example, if you get too bothered with having light and shadow in there, and you're like, oh no, I need a nice blend between everything, you're gonna have a lot of trouble doing non-metallic metal. Because non-metallic metal requires that if you're painting something that's very shiny, you need to make sure that there's a very sharp contrast between the brightest part of it and the darkest part. It's why that as you know, as I progressed as a painter, I started going more towards doing what we call value sketches, like I'm doing right now. I'm kind of just adding some texture and colors using the gray and ivory, because I find that if I don't want to spend too much time on the miniature, it's a good way of adding drama to it, adding contrast, adding color. And if I want to spend more time on the mini, having the initial sketch means that when I go in and start blending and mixing in colors, layering in more colors, I don't have to spend as much time trying to adjust the lighting. I just know where it is. The difference in this miniature, which has the very rough green effect, and the difference in something that's just one color. It is no contest with what looks better to the DI or the table. So my general recommendation for people that are new to painting is to not fuss too much about having smooth blends and smooth gradients, but to learn more about where to put the paint on your light and shadow falls. On your miniature. And once you progress with that, then you can worry more about blends. Also, learning where light and shadow falls on all kinds of materials is very helpful, because when you can start painting in textures into miniatures, is when you realize that, hey, painting everything is super smooth and having very nice blends, it's pretty boring. You want to paint hair that looks like hair, fur that looks like fur. And leather that actually looks like it has texture to it. And metal that looks like metal. And if you just focus on blending too much, I did find that a lot of people that did that ended up very samey looking images. Like, you could see there were gradients, but it wasn't really clear where the focus was on the miniature. But of course, there are definitely amazing painters that can just do that and be perfectly fine, because they have such a clear mental image of what they're painting. I think I should paint this grey ivory color too. But yeah, some painters can do that. I am not one of them. In fact, I'm a very haphazard painter. So, and also a very lazy painter. So the majority of the way I paint is to make it easier on myself to complete projects. And not get stuck having this block. A bit of a lag. See a few frames skipping. This shouldn't be the case. So, but it looks like she was frozen for a while. Are we back yet? But I am not smooth in the same way I would skin. So make sure that feathers are shiny. Because we're going to go over with that much darker blue later on, we want to make sure that it's a bit brighter first, so that when you glaze over, and you end up losing a lot of the, I guess, luminosity of the part you're painting. Make sure that you don't have to waste too much time going back. You can't expect much. So the part that over the head that I went over with, it's a lot darker now, looks better for sure. And because this particular paint is so translucent, I'm not bothering to really thin it down a lot. I'm just going over it as though I'm using it as a heavy wash. Glazing is great. It's an amazing tool for every painter to have. But depending on the color you're painting, the thickness of the glaze can really change. So for example, if I was using contrast paints for this, it would just work very well by using transparent colors. So if you're new to painting, you might think that you want your colors to all cover very well and be super opaque. That's not always true. In fact, in many cases, having colors that are translucent lets you work with them a lot more quickly if you're using techniques like mine, but I tend to underpaint a lot more and then bring back in colors by glazing or whatever other methods. Of course, we have lost our top level highlights for the Kangaroo, but that's okay because what I'm going to do later is that I'm going to take some, I guess, off blue highlights with an off blue, maybe it becomes a bit more electric or greenish color, and use that to paint in some of the highlights. And that will give a bit of a color shifting look. Because the color shift effect is when you have shadows or color that is clearly a very different color, and then you paint in your highlight with a unexpected color. So for example, if you do a color shift by painting a purple base and doing your highlights in maybe orange or bright green. I did say I wanted to do the feet as well. I think I want to paint them on a similar color to beak, which is an off gray to off white. So let's put that in right now. See there, it looks a bit bright right now. I can use a bit of dirt on it later. But that's easily fixed when we go through the process of painting everything else. So a little dirtier than this one. It's a bit more grey, but it's just pure grey for me. Let's drop the highlights. So I found that the most useful skill for me when I was starting out. And I kind of only really worked on it after I painted all of the veins, knowing how to just use the side brush or the end of the brush to hit the outer parts and do a highlight. Also, I really kind of miss that he's not really wearing pants. So I need to highlight his legs like feathers. Some very quick lines. Learning how to quickly draw a line, a highlight, down something was really useful skill. Like what I'm doing now. I'm not trying to draw a perfect shape highlight. I am drawing a lot of short lines and letting the sculpt itself shape where my highlights are falling. Because I'm hitting the outer areas of the sculpt. I'm gonna let that dry a little bit more. And do a heavy glaze of the nauseous blue. So if you're new to painting, working on your brush control is going to be one of the most helpful skills that you can have. Just need to work on getting the muscle memory in sync with whatever your eyes see. And that's going to be a lot easier when you have that basic technique down. When you're more focused about where to put the paint and what you can do with that, rather than just focusing on how to apply the paint, then that's when you really know that you've improved a bit. And it makes a huge difference, believe me. Sanguine base that I was using earlier, a bit of ivory. It's a bit too much ivory. We'll make do. Start some. I like semi-dried ivory. Definitely don't want that. Doing a nice loaded brush highlight down the center. So still a little bit of the weight in there. I'm just going over and wet blending. But as you can see, by just doing a little bit of wet blending, we really have a very nice highlight there. And everything else is about blending the highlight back there. I can see the terrible, terrible support marks that were left behind in this miniature. do it again. Ivory. Side. Going back and forth. Next blend. Downwards. So that's a nice and easy way to do some highlights on there. Not too much. So this is something that I use wet blending for very often, just in fabrics, especially when I'm painting fast. I tend to use what we call the loaded brush technique very often for that kind of painting. And honestly speaking, it's not really anything special. Once you understand it, you'll naturally be able to use it. And then you can go in and refine everything else after that. Sections of highlights here on the shoulders. And the brush color is starting to change really, so it's starting to blend downwards. And right now, let's see the ivory on there. I want to bring the color down quite a bit. So I'm taking the original sanguine base color and I'm blending it towards the initial loaded brush blending that I've done. And just bring it. Change color. So that part has really been highlighted. Not so obviously, but we adjust it later on. So loaded brush is also easier if you have a whole gradient of color that you can use to load your brush from. But I'm quite lazy, so I don't normally do that. Just arbitrarily paint on some highlights. A lot of painting feels like magic, doesn't it? Like when you first put colors down and then all of a sudden everything changes when you start adding your first highlights. I think that never really stops feeling like magic. And it's part of why I love the hobby so much. Like just seeing how things change. It's a lot more highlighted. That's why I'm gonna bring that color up to the top as well. Look a little more. Quickly wet blend some shadows back in. It's a sanguine base. Just hitting some spots with quick edge highlight so that it looks more like worn and ragged fabric. I just arbitrarily drawing in some long lines along the back here. Very comic style kind of highlighting. And I mean, just look at it, it kind of goes to everything that you thought for normal painting. But if you look at it further away, you can tell that's the shape of the piece. Just go back in and then over. Especially when it's still wet. And you can really have it looking a lot more blended and just see. Like that's what I mean when I say you don't have to worry as much about perfect brush strokes most of the time. Because knowing how to place will cover most of your errors. Got them highlighting then. It looks a little darker in the front, but it's okay. Some bright ivory on the grey piece of fabric around the wrist. Just laying down the ivory first. Because I want to paint it much brighter color. I think I painted a bright green, so having the undercoating is going to help. painting stream, I guess. Chat that someone was painting white. It's always fun. White is one of the best covering paints. White has great coverage. The reason people have issues with white is just whether the paint they're using has white that clumps up and becomes chalky, or they are making the mistake of painting white by using white to start with. White and black are one of the colors well. Let me tell people, don't start with the color that you're trying to paint. It survived a somersault to the table. And why is that? Why do you not start with painting white with white? That's because most white that you see in real life isn't a pure bleach white. And the other thing is that from a miniature painting point of view, is white is always, pure white anyway, is normally the singular brightest color on miniature. If you start painting with white, you have no way to go anywhere brighter. You can't highlight your white because you are already white. And that is why you never use white to paint white. You normally use a grey or cream tone or maybe a yellow first. And then you progress from there. Otherwise, if you find that your white has very bad coverage, you may need to shake your paint a bit. white because of the way its pigments work. It's at the largest pigments. It has very good coverage. So if your white is having issues covering, you might just be trying to paint over black, which is a terrible idea. Or something similar. In fact, the majority of miniature paints actually have either white pigment or black pigment added into them so that they can cover better. Which does mean that when you mix paint sometimes you might get some weird mixes because the white or black if they're mixed and turn your mixture grey or brown. Very common issue. Naturally, the answer to having issues with mixing is to just buy more paint. That solves all the problems. And I'm going for a bit more saturated into highlights with this piece because I think that it'd be fun. Because unlike the other pieces of cloth I was painting, the fabric is just a hood. A bit of the, I guess, of the back of the capelet thing. Over. And because it takes up less of the miniature, I can use a more bright and saturated color without having it look too bright and wrong. Bit of green, a little bit of the blue. Blue that I want to use. So the entire part with frostbite. Spike palette. It's a very nice bluish off-white. So I highlight the entire tunic for that last kind of with the bluish off-white, and just leave the grey and black that we have underneath as is. Right, quick check. Okay. So I'm going to be applying that mainly to his outer robes. He has some inner robes which I will just paint a different color later on. Probably some brown or something. Take care, see you around. Thanks for coming by the stream. And if you were painting, please post what you're working on in the chat on Discord. It's great for if you want painting. Anything that's a little cooler and cooler. And I find that off-white is something that I like buying because it's a pain to mix an off color if you're using white. Because you need to mix a large amount, just a slight shift in color that you get from white. So buying off-white saves me a lot of time. And it means that I can quickly put down highlights that are slightly different in color without wasting too much time. Also, I see that the mini has moved a little bit. It is shifting around as I paint it. That's okay, I'll just fix it after I'm done painting. So I should actually try to finish up this Kenpo soon, because it's already 10:26, which means I have been painting for almost 2 hours. It's not too bad. Let's paint the inner loops. A little bit of that bright ivory. A bit of frostbite, it's highlights. I'm trying to keep them a little more smooth looking than the outer loops, so that when I place the outer loops data, you can still see the difference. Spend a little bit of time to hit up the wrist wrap with bright ivory. Make absolutely sure that it is highlighted before we place color on later on. Using that same color later on for the belt. It's knotted belt. Okay, who's wearing So I'm just going to quickly highlight the outer areas. I might use something different as well. Who knows, right? Right. Lovely, kind of very useful. Always have off-whites. So his character is looking very grey right now. It is time for him to look a little brighter. Transparent blue. It's definitely what it says within a transparent blue. But it's also a very dark, if transparent color. So I normally thin it down a little bit. Apply that using a different brush. So one thing I like about this blue is that it's extremely saturated. It is a beautiful blue. And there's just that bit of color. Miniature has changed entirely. Hydrate, no hydrate, only paint. Down to blue in the boobs. Just this bit left. Done. So as you can see, how fast was that? Just adding the color and the initial sketch. Just go back and kind of fix the other parts I accidentally made them. Here's blue and apply that over the legs of the cat. Same thing that we just did with the frostbite blue. Then roughly do some highlights on his shield. I'm not caring too much about the metal part because I'm gonna paint that with metals. So it's fine if it goes over a little bit. And I'm gonna take the ivory now and highlight the upper part. So you can see there is an obvious difference in the colors that we have. Few lights here as well. Like that. Shoot. Quite a bit modded compared to the other one. I take a little bit of that transparent blue as well. The bottom half. And by doing that, we're adding a little more interesting color shading to the shade. A little bit more of some blue. Go back in with the transparent brown again. And there we go. Nice and fast. Easy shield. It's pretty good, if I might say so myself. Better shield. Get a little bit of blue in there first, I guess. Wash it off. It's like dark blue color, especially around the center metal. Right. Very good. And quick speed. Very ominous sounding. And now I'm quick layering with a little bit of bauxite there, mixed into the quick speed, which kind of gives me a greenish brown color, a bit olive even. That's gently applied all over the miniature. Set forward the highlight further, see what's in there. It was a bit bright at first because the paint isn't fully dry. But once it dries, this color especially changes a lot and becomes a lot more dull. So I'm not too worried about that. So, it's still back to this big dull later, so no worries there. So that should be not for now. Pens. So a little bit of upside down the brush, so it's cutting to more yellow off-white tone for the brighter parts. If they are RGB, that's going to make it a lot easier to identify them as well. Down below as well. This one's brush is totally done. Right now, should wet it, but that's actually not super important for the kind of almost dry brush that we do. So a little bit of the frostbite again, and that's because the back of the shield is also made of wood, so we need a little bit of color there. Before I put the transparent brown. The back area is not super important, so I'm just going to take some of the dark blue. And apply the transparent brown. Okay. So there's nice shading there. So I pretty much did nothing. I try not to really leave things unpainted. It's not something I really like doing. But for parts like this, where it's more important just have some color in there, it's fine. At least it's grey. So if I go over that with transparent brown, it will still look as though I painted something. It's worse if you're working with 3D print that's maybe like pink or green or whatever, and you want to make sure that you cover that color up first before you do this style of painting. The legs. Trying to be wrapped in some fabric as well. That'll be the same color that we use on the under tunic here. I'm gonna darken that down a lot later on, make it dirty. But the point of this is to try and finish painting up these triangles before the stream ends. And while they're not the most important miniatures, I don't want to just leave them in a half painted state. So I'm doing what I can with the time we have. spiral around inside the sheet. Which means that when I'm done with this, I think the only thing I will have left to do is to paint the metal bits. So I got the metal of the shield, the swords. I think I need to paint this out the same wood colors as well. So let me use the rucksack tan as an overall palette color. And it first goes on, it's a bit more magenta, which is a good thing because it lets you mix better with it. It's kind of like a CMYK, but then pure orangey crimson green. And because it's more of a magenta, you know that it's a true green. And not the kind of green that you expect. Which is normally blood green, it has a bit of like, you know, blue, a bit of orange in there. So just quickly applying this. is to paint, I'm using transparent colors. This is why not having good coverage is actually a good thing. Bit left, and what I need to do right now is to dip around the eyes. Who else have very bright red? This is deep, extremely saturated red, and the entire eye is just red. So I'm trying to get a very bright saturated color in there as well. And that's just what it looks like right now. I need to go back over later on with the bright ivory and add a dot of white to the eye. So that it looks like it's bright and glowing and not just red. Take the transparent brown, which is a little bit there, and apply that over the wooden stuff. Sure. Okay. So we do have to paint in some, we get some browns for the leather belts. Nice and easy brown to do that with. Color. I can just mix some of the ivory in to lighten it enough for the edges. It's not actually too important to have very precise colors for leatherwork. You take a chance to base coat the sheath scabbard of the sword, which I have been mostly neglecting. So, you know, even if it's not fully painted, that's okay. But I want some color that shouldn't just be grey. So do a bit of color straps on the sheet. Forgot to do the wrist wrappings for this guy. So let's paint them green. Saving lives right now. bit of red on there, mixing some brown, a little bit of ivory to quickly highlight this part and sheath. Just to make sure that they're a little brighter and they glow effect. It's past 7 PM, but I'm done. Well, minus doing the metallics, which can be done anytime. So it's a pretty good thing. Painting 3 minutes and 2 hours or so is a good 2.5 hours is a good thing. And given that we're pretty much going from scratch and we weren't doing just contrast paints the entire time. Not to mention that they all have different colors. So that's a pretty good record. Just touch up the red one here. Off my brush. They have been painted better, yeah, for sure. Definitely. In fact, it'll be some small improvements that I do, but it'll probably just be taking 10 to 15 minutes to paint up the base, and then do a bit of color on the metallics, and maybe highlight the drawstrings a little bit. But I think I'm pretty happy with how they look. Like, for characters that are normally just meant as like thugs to fight in game, I think that these scalps really stand out. They give them a bit more, I guess, character. And that's a good thing, because while you want to have lots of NPCs to fight, you don't want them to kind of just blend into each other and look really boring, especially in a game like Dragon Heist, where it's not just about fighting hordes and hordes of enemies, there's intrigue going on. So having NPCs that you can use, whether or not they are friendly or foes, means that people tend to remember the characters that you spend your time building. So that's an important part of DMing with ninjas, is that you can't just have them look generic like generic. It's okay, they're twin blights, but these are sentient creatures. And if you're picking sentient creatures, it's a lot easier to have that when they all look a little different. Assign their own personalities and have your players get more attached to them and more immersive what's going on. Or you can pay in like, I don't know, 10,000 goblins with like the same guns. That's okay, if that's what you like. For me, I think I really enjoy having all of them be slightly different, but still look kind of cohesive as a gang of kangaroo. So you can kind of tell that they fit together. And that's good. So of course you can tell who's the leader, because I've highlighted him up a little more. And he's the only castery looking one. But like for the others, they're not so generic, just stick to the background. So next up would just be doing some really simple and easy base coating on the cobblestones with colors that I have left, painting up the shields and the swords and the belt buckles. And then I can call them done and be ready for a game soon. So that was taking about 2.5 hours, which is not bad. Could be better, but I mean, painting too fast isn't a good thing sometimes. Like having the chance to go back and pretty things up. But either way, if you've been watching the stream, thanks for coming by. As for whether or not we'll be streaming tomorrow or next week, I don't quite recall. Am I gonna stream tomorrow? Yes, no, maybe? What are you gonna do? Special D&D day? You're gonna stream? Excellent. So if you've enjoyed the stream, if you want to hear more about D&D and how we run D&D, Crimson's stream tomorrow, if I recall, is going to be about how he runs a different style of game, a more spy style of game. So if you enjoy playing Heist and you want to try running your own in D&D, if you want to hear a bit more about the changes that he's making to Dragon Heist and how he writes games that are a little bit more cloak and dagger, then tomorrow is a good time to come back and listen to the stream. But if not, if you're just here for painting stuff, then tune in next week. Either on Saturday or Sunday, I've not decided yet. We might be busy. But if you're too busy, I'll just do a random surprise stream throughout the week. And definitely I'll be posting lots of pictures on the Instagram week to come, because I have 3 minutes finished, a lot more to go, and a huge backlog I need to work on.